November 1950. Since the appearance of Soviet MiG-15s on November 1, 1950, United Nations Air Forces, led by the U.S. Air Force, continued operations throughout November in the MiG Alley area of northwest Korea. Despite facing resistance from Soviet pilots, the U.S. Air Force maintained firm control over the skies. On November 2, two F-51 pilots, Captain Alma R. Flake, from 67th Fighter-Bomber Squadron, and First Lieutenant James L. Glessner Jr. from 12th Fighter-Bomber Squadron, each shot down one North Korean Yak. At the same day, FEAF flew the first RB-45 Tornado jet reconnaissance mission in the war. The 67th Squadron's last air combat of 1950 took place on November 6. Captain Howard I. priced down a Yak. In the week following their initial battle in the Korean War, Soviet pilots began conducting combat patrols over the Sinuiju region, maintaining a vigilant presence in the skies, covering the strategically important bridge near Sinuiju, the airfield there, and the roads over which supplies were flowing in a continuous stream to the North Korean and CCF forces. But encounters in this period remained scarce. Thus until November 6 the pilots of the Soviet 151st Guards Fighter Aviation Division had only several scrapes with enemy aircraft that had no results. By November 6, General MacArthur reported men and material in large force pouring across the Yalu bridges. The air campaign, which heretofore had been fought with restrictions that required precision attacks, turned into an unrestricted bombing campaign as MacArthur ordered FEAF Bomber Command, 5th Air Force and Task Force 77 to destroy anything and everything that might possibly be of any use to the enemy. On November 5, FEAF Bomber Command began incendiary bomb attacks on North Korean cities and towns. 21 B-29s of the 19th Bombardment Group dropped 170 tons of fire bombs on Kangi, located less than 20 miles south of the Chinese border. The attack destroyed 65% of the town's center. The response from Washington was immediate and negative, as a political firestorm was set off by news of the attack. On November 6, General Stratemeyer called upon Bomber Command to destroy the 6 international bridges over the Yalu and 10 cities that were suspected of harboring enemy troops. The 6 bridges were the dual bridge at Sinuiju, a highway bridge at Cheongseongjin, a railway bridge at Namsananai, and a highway bridge and railway bridge at Manpajan. Due to the large number or targets and the urgent need toward their immediate destruction, General Stratemeyer asked Admiral Joy's Task Force 77 to assist in the attack on the bridges. In the battles on November 6 and 7, Soviet pilots claimed to have shot down some American aircraft. However, U.S. records do not support this assertion. November 8 marked a pivotal shift. The U.S. Air Force commenced the day with a series of aggressive air operations with the attack on Sinuiju. Some 300 fighters had spent the early part or the day knocking out enemy air defenses with machine guns, rockets, and napalm. At that afternoon, in the largest incendiary raid of the Korean War, 70 B-29 superfortresses dropped some 580 tons of fire bombs on Sinuiju on the Chinese border. Other B-29s attacked bridges over the Yalu River for the first time. FEAF also deploying large formations of F-51 Mustangs to strike key targets across North Korea, all under the protective escort of F-80 fighter jets. On the other hand, the first to take off to repulse the attacks were 8 Soviet MiG-15s, led by the commander of the 72nd Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment's 3rd Squadron Major V.P. Affanin. In the area of Antong, Affanin's flight was attacked by 8 F-80s on a head-on course, which were covering the Mustangs. In the head-on pass with the F-80s, an external fuel tank on Senior Lieutenant A.E. Sanin's MiG was hit, but he safely made it back to Mukden in his jet. U.S. Air Force believed that one of the departing MiG-15s had been downed and credited it to the 16th Squadron's First Lieutenant Russell Brown, the first official victory of USAF pilots over MiG-15 jets. However, as it turned out, First Lieutenant Brown had only lightly damaged A.E. Sanin's jet, and the very next day he took off on another mission in it. Likewise, on the same day, the Soviet pilots believed they had achieved 3 victories. But the records of the U.S. Air Force corroborate none of these claims. U.S. Navy Task Force 77 was assigned the major bridges at Hyasanjan and Manabjan and were to assist in the attacks on Sinuiju. For 3 consecutive days beginning on November 9, F-4S and AD-4s from USS Valley Forge, USS Leyte, and USS Philippine Sea, protected by F-9FS flying top cover, hit bridges on the Yalu River in Sinuiju and supply concentrations in Hungnam, Songjin, and Chungjin. Skyraiders flying in formations of 8, supported by 8 to 16 Corsairs on flak suppression duty. Up above, as many as 16 Panther jets kept an eye on proceedings, flying top cover for the bombers. At 9 o'clock on the early morning of November 9th, 7 MiGs from the 139th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment, led by Captain V.P. Botchkov, head of the regiment's aerial gunnery division, took off to intercept the incoming assault by U.S. Navy Douglas AD Skyraiders. The Grumman F-9 F-2B Panthers from Fighter Squadron 111, known as the Sundowners and stationed aboard the Essex-class carrier USS Philippine Sea, CV-47, were already patrolling the skies when MiG fighters appeared, diving toward the Skyraiders below. Alert to the threat, the Panthers quickly moved to intercept, determined to protect their strike group from the diving attack. The Soviet flight broke up into single aircraft, or pairs, and did not counterattack with any organization. Visibility was poor, and airplanes would disappear then reappear in the clouds. The squadron commander, Captain Grachev, made a quick left turn, then reversed and rolled over into a dive. His 2 wingmen could not stay with him and visual contact was lost. Lieutenant William T. Amen, U.S. Navy, commanding officer of Fighter Squadron VF-111, saw Grachev's diving MiG-15 and, following him down, fired his 420mm cannon. Amen's wingman saw the MiG crash into a wooded slope and burn. Captain Mikhail Fedorovich Grachev was killed in this battle. This marked the Soviet 64th Fighter Aviation Corps' first combat loss and, simultaneously, the first officially confirmed victory for U.S. pilots over an enemy jet, specifically a MiG-15 fighter. A little later, just after 10 o'clock, 6 MiGs from the 72nd Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment under the command of Major A.Z. Borden took off for the Sinuiju area. Once in the area, they spotted a single B-29 bomber being escorted by 16 F-80s. Senior Lieutenant A. Rodionov tied up the covering fighters in combat, while Borden's element attacked the B-29 in turn. First to attack the bomber was the wingman Lieutenant A.M. Dimchenko, who fired at the B-29 at a range of 100 meters out to 800 meters, and then again at 400 meters. Next, Major Borden made a firing pass and opened up on the superfortress from a range of 300 to 400 meters. The flashes of shells striking the B-29 were visible, which left the bombers' 2 left engines burning. Lieutenant Dimchenko attacked again and finished off the B-29. The bomber erupted in flames and its gunners were no longer firing at Dimchenko's MiG, and soon the burning B-29 fell into some clouds. Senior Lieutenant Rodionov's flight also successfully engaged the 2 flights of covering F-80s, preventing them coming to the aid of the B-29. Several additional clashes ensued as the American air assault continued into the afternoon. The Soviet pilots of the 64th Fighter Aviation Corps believe that they tallied up to 7 victories, including 2 F-80s, 3 F-9 F-2S, 1 AD-2 and 1 B-29, with only 1 MiG-15 loss in return. But American records offer no confirmation of these claims. The demagged B-29 was an RB-29 reconnaissance aircraft, tail number 4461813, named Overexposed, from the 31st Strategic Reconnaissance Squadron. The plane managed to struggle back to Johnson Air Base, Japan. The aircraft overshot the runway and crashed while attempting a forced landing. The airframe broke into 5 major portions. 5 crew members died and the plane was written off. The lone survivor from the cockpit area was Corporal Harry J. Levine, who had been the tail gunner. USAF records show that he was the first enlisted man to shoot down a MiG-15 from a B-29. But Soviet records indicate that only 1 MiG was shot down by U.S. Navy pilot Lieutenant William T. Amen on November 9. 6 days later, on November 15, the 31st Strategic Reconnaissance Squadron moved on paper to join the 5th Strategic Reconnaissance Wing at Beale AFB, California. The 91st Strategic Reconnaissance Squadron absorbed the personnel and resources of the 31st Strategic Reconnaissance Squadron in Japan. On November 10, U.S. aircraft continued their assaults on targets across North Korea. Meanwhile, Soviet pilots persisted in testing the Americans' resolve and capacity to dominate the skies. Aircraft from both sides engaged in multiple skirmishes in the early morning. A formation of B-29s from the 371st Bombardment Squadron, 307th Bombardment Group, each loaded with 32 500-pound bombs, departed Kadena Air Base in Okinawa shortly after 6 o'clock Korea Standard Time. Their mission was to bomb strategic targets near Sinuiju, close to the Yalu River. Several hours later, as they approached their target at an altitude of 15,000 feet, the B-29 formation would soon face an encounter with MiG fighters. At 11:26, 8 MiGs, under the command of Major G.I. Kharkovsky from the 139th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment's 2nd Squadron, scrambled from the Liaoyang Air Base. 20 minutes later, this group of MiGs was approaching the Yantung area at an altitude of 21,000 feet, then the MiGs descended to 16,000 feet, and out in front of them, 16 kilometers away in an area east of Sinuiju, they caught the glints of the B-29 bombers from the 371st Bombardment Squadron. The bombers initiated a left turn as the MiGs closed in. Around 11:50, leading the attack flight, Major Kharkovsky and his wingman Lieutenant Akimov attacked the 2 trailing B-29s from below and behind, angling in from the left and the right. After the first aimed burst, the B-29 targeted by Kharkovsky began to lag behind the rest of its formation. Kharkovsky attacked it again from below and to the right, as a result of which the B-29, tail number 45 21,814, spouted flames. Other B-29s reported observing 11 parachutes as crew members bailed out from the stricken aircraft. 20 minutes after the attack, B-29 tail number 45 to 21,814 vanished from sight, ultimately crashing near Kumnongne. This marked the first B-29 shot down by a MiG-15 during the Korean War and the second B-29 destroyed. Of the 12 aviators on board, 6 were captured and, at the end of the war, were released and repatriated. 3 died in captivity and their remains were returned to military control during Operation Glory. The last 3 aviators remain unaccounted for. On November 11th, U.S. pilots had only one recorded engagement with Soviet pilots from 28th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment. Senior Lieutenant M.P. Nazanov's MiG was damaged by the F-80C of USAF Captain Clyde J. Whaley from 16th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, 51 Fighter Interceptor Wing. Attempting to make a crash landing at the airfield in Anong, which was still under construction, Nazanov crashed and was killed. On November 12, American forces launched another series of attacks on Yalu River bridges, employing piston-engine aircraft from the U.S. Navy and bombers from Strategic Air Command. As the strike aircraft began their runs, pilots from the Soviet 151st Guards Fighter Aviation Division persistently intercepted the incoming strikes. U.S. Navy VF-31, from the Leytes Air Group, which had 2 divisions of F-9F-2s up above on Target Combat Air Patrol TARCAP, promptly dove into the MiGs with their altitude advantage. Multiple Panthers got within firing range only to find that their guns were frozen, the same problem VF-112 experienced on November 10th. Nevertheless, the Panthers accomplished their mission of not allowing any MiGs to get a clear shot at the Sky Raiders or Corsairs. On November 13th, B-29 bombers continued their assaults on the Yalu River bridges. The U.S. Air Force noted a possibility that one of the bombs may have inadvertently fallen on the city of Antung. On November 14th, a formation of 18 B-29s once again targeted the bridges at Sinuiju. As the American bombers approached their objective, Soviet Major Kharkovsky and his flight launched multiple attacks from below and to the right, striking 2 separate B-29 groups. As a result, pilots of the 139th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment claimed 3 U.S. aircraft, and all 3 B-29s were credited to Major G.I. Kharkovsky, for which he was awarded the Order of Lenin. Pilots of the 67th Fighter Aviation Regiment shot down the other 2 planes. However, U.S. records indicate that only 2 B-29s sustained damage from the MiG attacks, with no additional losses reported. The 2 that landed due to enemy action landed at Kimpo. One had its brakes shot out and finally got in on the ground. It washed out 4 F-4US, Marine fighters. The co-pilot had his leg broken due to 20 mm fire, and the engineer was very seriously injured due to the enemy action. The other B-29 made its landing satisfactorily. The B-29, tail number 44 to 61676, named Sad Sack, unable to return to Okinawa, was forced to make an emergency crash landing at Kimpo Air Base near Seoul, South Korea. In the process, it damaged several parked fighter planes. Fortunately, there were no fatalities, though 3 crew members sustained injuries. This marked the second B-29 destroyed by Major G.I. Kharkovsky. Senior Sergeant Richard W. Fisher of the U.S. Air Force, serving as a gunner aboard a B-29 from the 307th Bombardment Group's 371st Bombardment Squadron, was credited with downing the MiG piloted by Podgorny. However, Podgorny's MiG managed to return safely to base. 2 of MiGs received damage. Senior Lieutenant Podgorny's jet and Lieutenant Akimov's aircraft received several bullet holes in it. On November 18, when aircraft from U.S. Navy CVG-3, CVG-5, and CVG-11 were engaged by multiple groups of MiG-15s operating from across the Yalu River throughout the day. In the course of the action, Soviet Captain A.I. Tarshinov's wingman Senior Lieutenant V. Bulev became distracted by his own attack against one of the F-9F-2s and abandoned his leader. During the ensuing melee, the straight-wing F-9Fs were easily able to outturn their adversaries. This allowed one U.S. Navy pilot, Ensign Frederick C. Weber, flying F-9F-2 Bureau number 125136, from VF-31, to cut inside the MiG-15 flown by Senior Lieutenant Arkady I. Tarshinov. Weber remained glued to Tarshinov's 6 o'clock as the MiG pulled up sharply and was hit in the fuselage with 20 mm rounds. The MiG was shot down. Captain Tarshinov was killed in his cockpit. From that point until the end of November 1950, there were relatively few engagements between American aircraft and MiGs. The Soviet Air Force carried out a rotation of its units. The combat operations of the pilots of the 151st Guards Fighter Aviation Division and 28th Fighter Aviation Division in Korea came to an end. On the night of November 26, USAF B-20 SIXS flew their first close air support night missions under Tactical Air Control Party Direction TACP. The 3rd Bombardment Group flew 67 B-26 missions along the 8th Army's bomb line in a 5-hour period. Still, the CCF drove both the 8th Army in Northwest Korea and the 10th Corps in Northeast Korea southward. On November 30, 1950, as part of the rotation of combat units in the theater of combat operations, Soviet pilots of the new 50th Fighter Aviation Division, which had just joined the roster of the 64th Fighter Aviation Corps, conducted their first sorties to familiarize themselves with the area of combat operations. That concludes the November 1950 episode of our MiG Alley series. More episodes will be coming soon. If you enjoyed the content, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thank you for watching.